back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
And welcome back to The Law Show on CL 650. We're talking with immigration and citizenship lawyers Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojkovic from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver. So the Citizenship Act is being amended. It's gone through Parliament. It's stuck up in the Senate there now to get back for, I guess, final approval in the House. We talked many times about how many years you have to be in Canada in order to qualify to become a citizenship. Was that changed with this?
Well, it hasn't changed yet, but the proposal is to change it back to the old qualifications, right?
Because it's a similar qualifications. They're not exactly the same.
Not exactly the same. So they're even actually more liberal than
But
they were
is that part of this? Part of the Bill C6?
It is. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
you needed 4 years. Currently, the law the way it is right now, you need to have 4 years in Canada, physical presence, actually in Canada, boots on the ground, in a period of 6 years.
And
right?
that could be coming and going. But
that could be coming and go, cumulative. And then out of those 4 of those years, you have to be in Canada 183 days, 50% of the time. And you have to show that you filed taxes if you're legally required to file those taxes.
And why was that too onerous?
Yeah, well, the Liberal government has decided to get rid of that. So this Bill C6 basically says it's taking too long to integrate these people. We shouldn't be mixing the Tax Act with the Immigration Act. So they've basically gone ahead, and the Bill C6 basically reverts back to almost the same requirement that they had before in terms of needing 3 years.
Out of 5.
Out of 5, which is more generous because it used to be 3 out of 4.
Right.
So you're getting more time to qualify. You don't need the 183 days in a 4-year period. So you don't have to be here 50% of the time in any year.
If I may clarify quickly, the 183-day rule was a rule that was put in by the Conservatives that if you wanted to count one day in a calendar year, you had to have 183 days. If you didn't have 183 days, you had 0.
You had to have at least 4 of those years had to have 183 days.
Right.
No, one of the problems we have is that when you...
You had to have 4 years to count.
When why don't we have a system where you stamp someone's passport in and out? Because when you leave Canada, nobody stamps your passport.
Well, that's changing, though. That's coming next summer.
Is it?
Canada's committed as part of the border agreements with the United States and our other commitments to other international treaties and to our 5-country agreement with some of our other security partners that we will be bringing into effect a exit system.
I was just in Europe yesterday. Actually, I was in Europe and I flew back last night. When I land in Frankfurt, they stamp my passport, and when I leave Frankfurt, they stamp my passport. They know exactly how long I've been there. It makes total sense to me. Then you could get around this fraud of having these groups.
Yeah, I guess the question is how much does that cost to do that? Right?
Yeah,
how much is that?
I mean, this is the same guy who's stamping it on it. I mean,
it's a second shift, right? You need a whole shift. You have to set up a whole framework for that to benefit what? When we can just ask somebody, show us your tax returns. Have you been here? And the reality is, I think there's a lot cheaper ways to do this. This exit control is being brought about by the U.S. because after 9/11, the U.S. has the same problem.
And going, yeah.
Well, what they realized, what Americans realized is that nobody, came to the forefront. Nobody's actually checking when people leave. So we have 11 million illegal immigrants, and we don't even know if that number's accurate because we're not keeping a track when people leave.
That's the Americans have 11 million,
suggest,
not us. We don't have 11 million.
I would suggest,
immigrants.
flying a lot. I travel a lot. I don't think it's too onerous to have people stamped in and out. I think it's common sense. This is protecting our country.
But it's not, Zach, in fairness, you're flying in and out, sure, but that's not most border crossings in Canada. Most border crossings are land
But
crossings.
can't they just keep electronic records of...
Well, the Americans have the record.
Right.
So it's a question of... It's not terribly difficult to get both records from both sides, right? In your Europe example, within Europe, none of them keep any records of any kind. So, if you flew from Frankfurt to Spain, it's not like anyone stamped you either way or checked your passport.
But they know when I entered and exited Europe. Generally, the Eurozone.
That's all they know.
That's all they know, yeah. Okay, I just want to get into, the common thread of many of these shows that we've done is that there's a pendulum that swings from one extreme to the other depending on who's in government. So we've had this sort of much more conservative view, more onerous to become a Canadian. What's the tagline they had? Harder to get,
easier to lose.
Okay, so now the pendulum's swinging the other way. We now have the Liberals in power. So we now have a Tory leadership race. There's these people coming forward, and I'm guessing there's some more extreme on the right ideas about immigration.
very, very interesting recently. So, you've had Kelly Leach, who's from Ontario and has put her name forward, and she's brought in she hasn't talked about the number of immigrants, but what she's specifically been in the news about is that we should have a Canadian values test, so that all immigrants should be screened to see if they have the right values to immigrate to Canada and sign some sort of declaration that they agree with those values and be screened for that. And I imagine she's run the numbers, and there might be support in her party. A lot of the other leadership hopefuls have come out and said that they are in total disagreement with that. And most shockingly, recently we've seen Chris Alexander come out talking about, as we were mentioning on the last segment, this year we'll immigrate about 305,000 people to Canada. His proposal is that we should be immigrating about 400,000 people a year. So he's saying, let's have more immigrants, and he's questioning whether there's any point in having this.
And that's a conservative.
That's a conservative hopeful. Yeah,
now, a lot of people would suggest that maybe there would be on the conservative side, leading less people.
I mean, what we haven't seen yet, shockingly, and I was talking about earlier, if you take a look at Trump, Brexit, Europe, what's going on in Europe in terms of the nationalistic parties, you haven't seen a Canadian party yet come forward to take that stance. I think Kelly Leach is the first one. And I think, I'm interested to see where this is going to go, because I don't think, if you take a look at that Angus Reid poll that I was talking about, where only 16% of Canadians say they want more immigration, I don't think we're immune from that anti-immigration mood that is out there. I mean, we're very all happy here in Canada.
Well, it's interesting because I just want to bring that up. There was I can't remember the poll who did it, but they did a study and they actually found out that Canadians are actually less tolerant than we all believe we are. Like, we all have this hold hands, kumbaya, everything's great. But when you dig a little bit farther down, people are like a little bit more reserved about letting all of these quote unquote foreigners into the country, right? So,
I think it's interesting if you take a look what happened in Britain, right? Under Tony Blair, he increased immigration to the point where they were getting 600,000 immigrants a year. Half of them through the EU, and so 300,000 a year through the EU and 300,000 through other sources of immigration. So 600,000. And if you take a look what the eventual backlash that led to that ended up them, voting to leave the European Union.
A big part of it, because my family's from the UK, was the Eastern European workers that came in and were doing undercutting the locals.
There was something like 400,000 Poles living in London, and they're basically, I did a lot of work. I used to fly to London to help people immigrate to Canada, and that was a common complaint, is that the work that a plumber used to do, he couldn't compete against the Polish plumber that was coming in, that was living 10 people to a room and sending money back to his family living in Poland.
That's exactly what I heard.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, though, how much of this policy debate is driven by your position, whether you're in opposition or you're in government, and what kind of budgetary constraints are on you. What's telling about the Chris Alexander was the last Minister of Immigration.
So he's up front. He knows the portfolio.
He knows the portfolio.
Well, someone would question that. I guess.
Someone would question that. But I mean, he's a career diplomat, right? Sure. He was a diplomat in the Foreign Service and in Afghanistan. Yeah. What Chris Alexander was particularly famous for was pushing the government's agenda under the last government very aggressively. And what he was saying back then was they were towing the line at 240 to 280,000 immigrants. Now he's saying, now that he's running for leadership, now that he's in opposition, 400.
So do you think that's pandering to the minority vote?
I don't think it's pandering to the minority vote at all. I think what's really going on is, now that they're in opposition, they can talk about policy in a broad sense, and they can have a debate about it. Whereas when they were in government, they were restricted by, one hates to say this, but they were restricted by the amount of processing resources they gave their own departments. I mean, the Tories ran that federal government lean. Mm-hmm. They ran tight operating budgets. They didn't trust their civil service much. Their relationship with the people that were supposed to be doing the work was quite poor.
Well, when Mr. McCallum was here...
Now that they're in opposition... Yes, very good point.
Mr. McCallum was here. He was clear that the reason they're stuck at 305,000 for this year was that the department came back and said, we can't process anymore. That's the most. So he would have liked to have more people immigrate this year, but they told him that we can't do it. And so, part of his commitment is he believes if they make some changes, they'll be able to process it.
So you wonder how much of that old argument about is 240 the right number, is 400 the right number, really something about resources devoted to the department rather than anyone having a firm view one way or the other.
But I think this is partially trying to stake out ground different from his competitor, Kelly Leach. So you're saying, okay, you're going to say you're the the anti-immigrant, or you're
I'm going to be the pro.
I'm going to be the pro. So
all right. Well, it's going to be fascinating to watch. Not as exciting as U.S. Politics, but still interesting nonetheless. Thanks very much for being in studio. Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojkovic from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver, talking about immigration and citizenship law. And that's it for today's show. Thanks, gentlemen, for coming in.
Thanks, Zach.
And we will speak to you next time. This is The Law Show on CL 650.